Hello and welcome to Camp Xbox. Military shooters were all the rage in the 6th generation, yet many of them didn't have pure realism in mind. But when Pandemic Studios, the creators of Star Wars Battlefront, got together with the US Army, they conceived of a training tool as well as a commercial game with realism in mind. With that venture, we got Full Spectrum Warrior. I played it recently, and let me tell you its history, its lasting impact, and how I felt about it. All footage was captured off of an original Xbox, except when noted, and I want to thank my YouTube channel members for their support. Let's go ahead and hop into this game's history.
Don't just stand there. Get your squad together and protect the convoy. You hear me? Move it! Bravo! Form up! Alpha team, let's go, let's go, let's go!
Full Spectrum Warrior's history can be traced back to the 1990s when the Army was interested in training through simulation. However, they believed simulations needed to improve and wanted to just go for a video game. The military invested $45 million in forming the Institute of Creative Technologies at the University of Southern California. Through them, the investment of around $4 million went to Sony Pictures Imageworks and Pandemic Studios. Pandemic Studios in 1999 only made Battlezone 2 Combat Commander, a sci-fi shooter, but it would go on to make some 6th generation classics with the Battlefront and Mercenaries games. In this deal, Pandemic was to develop an army training tool, but a commercial version would be built alongside it as the process went along. These two versions would be completely different because what the army needed differed from what would be a fun game. In the military, you might want to avoid a fight versus fighting head-on like you would in a video game. During the development process, the developers wanted to put the game on PS2, but that had to be scrapped when realizing American military bases wouldn't house non-American hardware. This means the development would only go on the Xbox for the Army version. The development of this game was mostly hidden, and it wouldn't be unveiled to the public until 2003, at that year's E3. Most outlets were impressed by this surprise reveal, with IGN thinking it was innovative to control the troops and where they go versus just being a shooter game. More and more would emerge about the commercial release, but the military version was kept under wraps. What was initially announced as a March 2004 release would get pushed to June, and there were issues obtaining a limited run for the military since the minimum for printed discs was way over what they needed for the military. They were able to accomplish this though, even though the final commercial retail copy came with the military version included. On June 1st, 2004, Full Spectrum Warrior was released on the Xbox in North America and later that month in Europe. Later that year, it would see a PC port and a PS2 release in 2005. I have never experienced this game before recently. I'm not much of a military guy, so this game never spoke to me when it was new. Yet, I've gotten many comments telling me to check this one out, so I recently played through it. And let me tell you how I felt about it, breaking it into sections, starting with the plot.
That's beautiful.
Cut the hippie shit. Look for something to shoot.
This game takes place in a fictional country named Zekistan. It's run by a dictator named Mohammed Jabbar al-Affad, who is trying to exterminate the natives of this country through death camps. He's also a ringleader for a world terrorist organization. It's every real-world evil person rolled into one, and you need to trek through cities in order to take him and high-ranking officials out in the process. You lead 2 fire teams, Alpha and Bravo team, each with 4 men. You run through cities, taking out resistance fighters along the way. You're told to avoid fights if you can and to reach your destination. This is a light story, and the plot is not the main focus of this game, so it won't really weigh as heavily on my final consensus. It serves as the basis as to why you might be at an airport to capture it, or other tasks, but there really isn't much riveting story-related dialogue, and when it's there, it's fine. If you've seen any military-related film of the era, you know what to expect, and it's obviously tied to real-life events and horrors. One of the most surprising moments in this game is when you find a mass grave of civilians. It's shocking and realistic, and not something I was expecting from a game that was paid for by the American military. This could be seen as a recruitment tool to some, but it's moments like these where you face real death and horrors of war that it really makes you want to steer as far away from it as you can. This game does have a surprising amount of characterization. Each character in both squads has a personality and unique lines. They are military cliches like the gun nut, the smartass, the comedian, and others you've seen in military movies. I like it though, and it adds a little more flair to the game than commanding just blank troops around. In some way, you are controlling characters with a little more personality to them, making them relatable even if they are cliches. They're not riveting and they have silly dialogue, but it's a fun touch. Though you don't really get to know them well, and I would have liked to have seen a little more dialogue and flair with them throughout the game, but it is war, and there is hardly any time to talk. I'd say the plot overall is okay. It has some decent characters to connect with, and only serves as the setup for playing through the gameplay developed for the military. It doesn't use any real-life travesties, but is clearly defined by the history of warfare. It works, and that's all it needed to do to allow the gameplay to shine.
Fire Team Bravo, get moving! Oh. Point fire. Use your sit rep. Target eliminated.
When I first heard about Full Spectrum Warrior, I was fully expecting a traditional first or third person shooter. It comes with the territory, and it was very popular in the 6th generation, especially on the Xbox. I was pleasantly surprised to find that it was a tactics-style game, and a really fun one to play as well. In this game, you control 2 different squads, and usually levels consist of you getting from point A to point B in large city areas. You usually have multiple paths to reach your destination. You command your squad to take on the streets and defeat enemies along the way. It's a slow but thoughtful approach, and it goes for realism. You never actually command any one member and instead tell them where to shoot and where to cover, asking you to think about keeping your team safe over killing enemies. This slow approach is rewarding and plays excellently. This might be one of the best tactics games you can play on the original Xbox. Something about weaving through cities and hanging on to every corner to hide behind fire is excellent. One false move and one teammate can die, so you have to be extremely careful. It almost plays out like a puzzle game. For example, you might have a group of soldiers dead ahead, and you have to use Team A to lay down suppressing fire, so the enemies have to hunker down and can't aim at Team B, who is coming from the other side of the alley to get clean kill shots on them. It's fun because it requires thinking and planning to take out enemies, and when you accomplish the goal of taking no hits or using as little ammo as possible, it's elating. It's this style of gameplay over and over, but it never really gets tiring. I think it's due to some great level design, and it works together to make some combat encounters feel different every time. You will mainly be in cities, but they pull some interesting locales out of it. You might be in a market with little cover, or a palace with high vistas that look down at you, or at an airport that requires you to hide behind planes. It's all well designed, and it feels like new obstacles to overcome as you move along. The added difficulty of only taking a few hits, meaning death, can make this tense. Once you ramp up to the hardest difficulty, it's an extremely tense experience and only meant for the game's hardcore fans. On normal mode though, I think it's the right amount of challenge to match its gameplay. That being said, this game is not perfect and some minor issues do add up. For one, the cursor has its issues. You move around your cursor in 3D space, but it has problems when hitting objects. I found that it easily clung to things too hard, and having to swerve around objects is a little annoying. Another thing is that there can be some high amounts of empty space. Sometimes when you're going from one checkpoint to the next, there will be sections with nobody around. This would be common in war, but it feels tedious when you're slowly walking through areas and you spend a good chunk of time sweeping the streets and no one is around, making it feel like you wasted too much time. I also think I should note that I've seen many complaints about the tutorial, which takes about an hour to get through. It is long, but I get that it is a new gameplay style, and it wants it to feel like basic training. It really goes over everything in detail, and it didn't bother me at all. Just go in knowing that the tutorial is long. Other than that though, I have no issues with the fundamental gameplay. The movement from place to place, the ability to tell your squad to lay down regular fire or suppressing fire, usually with the tap of a button, is solid, and the level design works really well. The tactical gameplay works perfectly with the level design to craft something slow but still fun. It's a combo that can be tough to pull off, especially on a console. It's long, intense, and full of surprises. Not only that, you get a co-op mode, and this did support Xbox Live co-op back in the day, and I really hope Insignia adds this one at some point to revitalize it. I didn't know what to expect going into this one, but I came out with a highly entertaining game, and I was impressed by this game's gameplay.
Enemy target front, 203. Got some action! Fire Team Alpha.
Full Spectrum Warrior is a good-looking game on the original Xbox. It supports 480p and a nice widescreen. It has a nice definition with great draw distances. It's always excellent seeing the game in widescreen with an HDMI adapter. It feels like the true connecting point between generations and has a nice view to everything. This game features a ton of sand and deserts, so expect a ton of particle effects. You can also expect a more washed out color palette. So you won't see a lot of popping colors, but it does fit the aesthetic that the game is going for, with a more realistic war feeling. It captures realism well for an Xbox title, and the character and enemy animations are solid. The animations of hiding behind cover and popping out are a bit slow, but once again they fit that aesthetic of realism. This dedication to that style makes this game meld together so well. It does a great job with detail in all the levels. It never feels like layouts were repeated, and every type of city looked similar, but had enough distinct differences to the architecture to make it stand out. I do always find it a little interesting in games like this though with cover, where you use things like fridges and couches and they're all laid out perfectly in the world to use for cover for enemy fire. But this is something gaming still continues to do, and honestly it's just a nitpick. This game is backwards compatible on modern Xbox consoles and looks incredible on there. This game already looked good, but it all comes out clear with minimal blur and looks extremely clean. It's a great upgrade to the game, and if you're someone who doesn't have to play on original hardware, this is the premier way to play it. Even though if you're only playing it on the Xbox, prepare for something that looks solid and strives for realism, so don't expect eye-popping visuals, but something that has the military look of the period and does it well.
I'm repeating. Point fire to point fire.
Yes, sir.
Point fire. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, got one.
The audio in Full Spectrum Warrior is acceptable, and has no real standout for me. This game goes for a classic military-styled soundtrack with horns and strong drums. You would find this type of music in Medal of Honor, but here it just doesn't have the same bravado. I do think the game doesn't take a significant hit from that though. I do wish it was just a bit stronger though, and that it was a little more memorable. The voice acting though is pretty good, with every character having a nice personality. You will shout orders and hear your troops yell back. I like that it gives you clues on what to do, such as when a troop isn't buying cover, they'll tell you that they were told to never do this in training.
Damn. This place sure looked prettier from the Black Hawk.
We're not in the Black Hawk anymore, so get your head on. Alpha, move out.
I also like the person that controls the UAV. They have a distinct voice, and even though they repeat lines, it's a neat little addition to talk to someone outside of the battlefield.
We are 5x5 on station for recon at 10 clicks. Over.
I do think it has some issues with repeated lines overall, but it's never to an annoying point and works with the military commands of the game. As for general sounds of warfare like gunshots and grenade explosions, they're all fine, never being bad enough to take you out of the game, and they blend nicely into the background. It's all cohesive and works well, which is all you can ask for in a game like this. If one sound is bad, it takes you right out, but here it captures the flow of warfare nicely.
Tango down. Yes, sir.
A cheat code can be entered to gain access to the military version of this game, which is a neat inclusion into the package. It's a piece that I feel like could have easily been only for the army, but I'm happy we can preview what they got. And it's surprisingly different, and I feel like it's worth getting its own section because of that. From the start, you can tell it's much more unpolished. This game doesn't look as good, and the frame rate can get a little choppy. The menus are bare bones too, but you get a lot more details on your missions. You select what map you want to play on, and it gives you intel to read on what exactly you're doing. You can also choose all the elements in the game and how much they appear, such as the number of enemies and civilians, and what weather is going on. It's actually interesting just how customizable of an experience this game could be, and I'm surprised custom games never made it into the retail version. Yet with that being said, is this version fun enough to keep playing? Not really. It's a neat but definitely unpolished mode. It's extremely difficult too, playing into the realism that the military version strives for. The controls are swapped around too, and I never quite got my head wrapped around on how this controlled. I do like that in this version that all the civilians will stand around and call you names. It's an interesting touch for those training to get used to things like this happening in foreign countries.
Filthy Americans! Go back to your home, don't vote! This is our home, Americans! No voting!
I can't say whether or not this version would be suitable for training, but we'll look into other people's feelings in the lasting impact section. Yet on its own, it exists here as a nice novelty, but nothing worth sticking around for. Full Spectrum Warrior was a pleasant surprise for me. It's a great tactical experience that is all about taking your time and leading your troops around like a puzzle game, figuring out the best paths to go on and how to kill enemies. The controls work fairly well, and the look on the original Xbox is solid. The music and audio do its job, and though the plot isn't that memorable, it still is interesting and fun enough to keep the experience strong. Something about the core gameplay clicks extremely well here, and I played this one for hours straight, figuring out what paths to take the whole time and having a blast. If you like something that requires more attention and thought in your shooting, this is a great one to play nowadays. Out of the 98 games I've covered so far on the original Xbox, Full Spectrum Warrior goes in at the 26th slot. It goes above Jedi Academy because I think this is a better put together experience, but only by a little bit. But Top Spin goes above it because it has much stronger replay value. Full Spectrum Warrior came out to great reviews upon release and holds an 84 out of 100 on Metacritic. IGN gave it a 9.2 out of 10, giving it high praise and calling it an achievement in design and visionary. GameSpot would be less as enthusiastic with a 7.5 out of 10, loving the game design but felt it was too linear. In official Xbox Magazine's August 2004 issue, they would give it an 8.8. They felt that it was original and innovative, but it felt too repetitive. After its release, Full Spectrum Warrior got some heat alongside its awards. According to the Tampa Bay Times, some in the Army were dissatisfied with the game's final product, finding that the game was fun but actually provided no real training basis and wouldn't work for soldiers preparing for battle. It even faced a lawsuit from an employee who allegedly was fired for bringing up the pandemic, that they were more focused on the commercial version and giving the military a bad deal, though that case was dismissed. Yet there were still some that would come to defend the game, and overall, people were satisfied. But the game was never quite used for its intended purposes as much as it was hoped for. In 2016 though, articles were running that a modded version of this game was used to check for signs of PTSD in returning soldiers. Soldiers would be strapped into VR gear and walk around in the game world with loud noises and smells like gasoline being pumped into rooms. It was used to help soldiers face the horrors of war after returning. A noble effort, and I'm happy to see this game getting some use years later. The sales of the commercial version would do very well, leading to a sequel a little bit later. This would lead to a golden age of Pandemic Studios with hits like Star Wars Battlefront and Mercenaries. Still, unfortunately, they would close in 2009, ending an excellent legacy in gaming. As for consensus nowadays, I see a lot of praise in YouTube comments, and whenever I Google this game, I see memories from people on Reddit. It still holds high regard to some, yet on Backlogged, with 177 plays, it only holds a 2.9 average. I do think for some that the military connection is something they don't like to see. Yeah, it does seem like for some it's just an average game. But I do think, in the context of its time, and I've been digging deep into the 6th generation with the Xbox, you can just tell how revolutionary this game was at its release. I really enjoyed this one, and I say, check it out. But that wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed this review, leave a like. Also, comment below with any memories you have of this game, or if you're interested in this. Also, tell me what I should cover next. Subscribe to keep up with the retro Xbox content. And I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube channel members. Thank you so much for your support. You really help out the channel. And I'll see you here next time at Camp Xbox.